certainly glad you came. And now you're with all these chuckleheads over here. This is the chucklehead side. Chucklehead, 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 chucklehead. Yep, all of them.
Do you want to come up
Hi,
kind
Mrs.
of
Toohey.
front and have a...
Can you see your husband there?
Okay.
Did you go say hi? Yeah. Front row is lucky. Is it falling off? Fix it. You gotta fix it now. Oh, yes.
You can either go here or on the opposite side of the front row. That way he's on the end.
Thank you. You're gonna have to wait.
Climbing up on Salisbury Hill, I could see the city lights. The wind was blowing, time stood still.
Hi, can you guys
Eagle flew out of the night. He was something to observe. Came in close, I heard a voice.
I think I hear it in there now.
Standing, stretching every nerve. Had to listen, had no choice. I did not believe the information. I just had to trust imagination. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Son, he said, grab your things, I've come to take you home. I resigned. My friends would think I was a nut, turning water into wine. Open doors would soon be shut. So I went from day to day, though my life was in a rut, until I thought of what I'd say, which connection I should cut. I was feeling part of the scenery. I walked right out of the machinery. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Son, he said, grab your things, I've come to take you home. In her net, I'm never where I wanna be. Liberty, she pirouette. When I think that I am free, watch my empty silhouettes. Close their eyes but still can see. No one taught them etiquette, so I will show another me. Today I don't need a replacement. I'll tell them what the smile on my face meant. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Hey, I said, keep my things, they've come to take me home. They've come to take me home.
All right, everybody, welcome. So glad you're here. On behalf of the Valparaiso International Center of the Vic, I'm Dwayne Davison, and you are at Fourth Friday. Tonight's presentation is on Canada. So I was asked already by hecklers in the front row about why I didn't have a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey on.
Boo.
But my understanding is the St. Louis Blues are Canada's favorite team. Is that? That's true.
Dwayne was hosting tonight. He got the hook.
So,
Montreal Canadiens, obviously.
Yes, the O'Connors in Montreal have told me there is a team there that apparently was very good once upon a time.
Correct, also.
The Canadiens, but yes, 26 Stanley Cups perhaps. Right. So I think we're good. No, it is on. So anyway, tonight, if you were looking for some poutine, if you were looking for, I heard Molson beer someone was asking about, but no, some April wine.
Alexander Keys.
Yeah, some other treats we have that you'll hear about a little bit later, but. Tonight we have Natalie Krivas, who is with her husband Peter and her daughter Eliana. They are in the front row and they have been very helpful with getting some original Canadian food going. Some April wine. And just a little reverberation back here, just so we're aware for the
I thought those were just the voices in my head.
Yeah. There we go. Thank you. So, with that in mind, we are recording live. If anyone is watching from Canada or Nova Scotia specifically, hello there. We are glad you're here, and we will have this recorded for future use. If you're desperate to watch it over and over and over, because Natalie's been so riveting, you will be able to do that in a couple days through our website, valpovic.org, and our Facebook page as well, thanks to Tom Davis. So look for that in a couple of days. But we are looking forward to Natalie getting going here. So I'm just going to throw it right over to her, and please give Natalie a warm welcome.
You're not just clapping for me, you're clapping for your northern neighbors. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Okay, so you're here to see a presentation about your northern neighbors. Okay, hello, Mrs. O'Day. Nice to see you. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. My husband just got off of work. If you could please stand and show your uniform. Yep, just got off of work today. He had to drive all the way down. Yep. Okay, so I also had a friend bring me a most wonderful sound producer, which is the calling card for any Canadians in the area. In fact, it's so effective that when I hit these buttons, depending on where they're from in Canada, if they're living in the tri-state area, they will come to this place. They will hear it, and you know what this is? It's an emergency Bigfoot. It's emergency Bigfoot. Most wonderful. Okay, we have Sasquatch. Yes, we do. Only one. That's the howl. So the howlers are on their way. Depending on where they're from in Canada, if they're living in the snort one I haven't heard before. To this place, they will hear it, and you know what? Those are the bullies. Those are the roars. And then last but not least, the groaners. Everyone knows the groaning Canadians. Yes, we do. So thank you very much, Dr. Holt and Sarah. Really appreciate that. Okay, so I have a lively presentation. I've made a bunch of slides. I think we're going to get through them all. I don't know if anyone told you, but you're hostage now here for the next 1 hour. So if you get up and leave, I will call you out. I will shame you, and you have to come back. So there will be, most of it will be, I'm hoping, funny, a little self-deprecating, because that's what us Canadians like to do best. I will dive into some history, so let me test out my tech here. I have a lively presentation. I've made a bunch of slides. I think we're yes, I will be sharing some facts about Canada. Please keep in mind that this is one person's perspective, right? And I guarantee that if you didn't know anything about Canada today, or you thought you knew about Canada, when you're done, you're going to be very confused. Okay? Very confused. We're going to have test questions. We're going to have trivia. Ellie, if you could hold up some of the treats for the trivia. I got some Canadian treats thanks to, what is that called? Rocket Fizz, Rocket. Yep, so we have Crispy Crunch. And here, stand up, Ellie. You've got Crispy Crunch and Coffee Crisp. This is the superior. So if you get this guy, it's because she didn't like your face. No offense, no offense. We've already had a talk, right? Okay. I am going to dive into a little bit of history on Canada. Now, I grew up in Nova Scotia, and I lived 10 years in Quebec, primarily in Montreal. So I'm really going to touch on those places for the most part. I know that Pastor Jim from VU was here many years ago. He did a presentation. He's from like the West, you know, the West over there. We don't really know anything about that, so we're not even going to try. Besides, it's a big country with a rich history. So less is more, I think. And again, it's already an hour. So the plus for me is that I have a teaching background. So any snoozers out there, you better open them up and get ready, okay? At the end, we did bring some food. My husband and I worked on some Canadian treats. I'm going to tell you now to get your taste buds going. But again, it's not going to be for a while. So we made poutine. Poutine is a dish I will explain a little bit to you later. It is one of those dishes that you want to have in your 20s when you've been out too late and then you just need like a bar or a restaurant to stop at and we're all dive. That's the food. Speaking of which, donaires, kind of like a gyro, but the sauce is different. It's a tangy, sweet, garlicky sauce. So everyone has to eat it or else the people who don't will smell the bad breath and we don't want that. So we made and then I made oat cakes, actually more accurately, my husband made oat cakes. Thank you so much, Peter. Oat cakes are a somewhat of a bland treat, but very well known and treasured in Nova Scotia. It's kind of like shortbread. Okay, that's our vegetarian option. And then we brought some ice wine. 2 little bottles, because they're not inexpensive. We'll pour those out in small quantities. When that's gone, we move on to maple syrup, because in my country, we drink maple syrup like it's little liqueur. Okay? All right. But very well known and treasured in Nova Scotia. Kind of like shortbread. I want to make this a little interactive. I hope you all don't mind. What do you know about Canada? What do you think about when you hear about Canada? I want to say that nothing will be offensive, but like, you know, let's try. So I'm giving you some inspiration, and if I'll take hands. What do you know? What do you hear about? You could just yell.
They talk funny, eh?
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a little interactive, if you all don't mind. What do you know about Canada? What do you think about? Huge country. You hear how big about Canada? Bigger than the U.S.? Okay, bigger than most countries, right? Okay, what else? Come on, let's try. So I'm giving you some inspiration, and if I'll take hands.
Big gold mine.
Cold. What do you know? Gold mine, yep, yep. There are polar bears, yep. They like to come and visit us sometimes. What else?
Boundary waters.
Boundary waters, yeah, yep. Huge country. Mounties. How big? Yep, right here. Yep, Mark wants to be one. Oh. Okay. Free and hard to get health care with an asterisk. We're going to talk about. Yep.
Their restaurants don't like to put condiments out on the table.
Gold mine, yep, yep. And when they give you the ketchup, they just bring it in a little cup. So this guy would take the ketchup and put it in his hat and then use that as a dipper. Yep.
Tim Hortons.
Boundary Waters, yeah. The Red Green Show. Yes. And the Molson Brothers. Yep, right here. Yep, Mark wants to be one. Milk comes in bags. Look at that. You see this? Do you know how many times that's happened to me? The milk comes in 4 plastic bags, and then it's in a plastic bag. So anybody who wants to reduce plastic, this is not your rodeo. You have to cut the tip, and then you put it in a pitcher that looks like it's from 1980, because it probably is. And then you have to make sure that the tip is not too wide open, or else you're going to have that. See, that's a rookie move. Am I right, Aaron?
Milk comes in
Aaron
bags.
is
Look
my
at that.
plant in the
You
audience.
see
She
this?
spent some time
Do you know how
with
many
us,
times
so
that's
we may be
happened?
drawing from her in a bit.
The milk
So,
comes in 4
who's this?
plastic bags, and then it's in a plastic bag.
Bob and Doug McKenzie, eh?
Plastic?
Yeah.
This is not your rodeo.
Who's
You have
that?
to cut the tip, and then you put it in a pitcher.
Crushing, crushing your head. Crushing. This is Kids in the Hall.
Make sure that the tip is not
You're nobody.
wide open, or else you're gonna have that.
This was my house.
Right, Aaron? Aaron is my plant.
Yep, lived there till I was 7. William Shatner. My mom went to high school shortly with William Shatner. Of course, we've got Celine Dion, okay.
Who's that?
Trailer Park Boys, world's trashiest show.
Crushing your head.
Yeah,
Crushing. This is
excellent fishing. Excellent fishing.
This
Oui, c'est vrai, c'est comme ça que je vous connais. Bonjour, c'est cousine, c'est vrai.
William Shatner.
C'est vrai, moi aussi. Pas vrai pays? Ah, française. Ah, on va parler de ça tantôt.
Of course,
We
we've
just-
got Celine Dion.
Yes.
Trailer Park Boys.
Oh, isn't it great that I'm in the front and you're in the audience? Great.
Excellent.
All right. So I put up a little bit more because you can't just stop there. Just so you know, Justin Bieber's Canadian. We did not send him here though. Wish we would have given the boot. Get it, boot? South Park. Don't like that show because of that episode. This is Red Green, our friend. I'm getting a little verklempt.
Great.
This guy
All right.
is a legend.
So I put up a little bit more because you can't just
Mulch
stop
Day
there.
Michael, right, Ellie?
Just so you know,
Mulch Day
Justin
Michael. I'm
Bieber's
planting a
Canadian.
seed now.
We did not send him here though.
Forewarned. Mulch Day Michael is coming
Wish
for
we
you.
would have given.
All right. So I had a couple things down.
South Park.
What about this? Over polite? Are we an over polite people?
Our friend. I'm getting a little.
No.
verklempt.
Well, when I was 19 years old, I was going across the street at a stopped light. I had every right to cross the street. This is in Pittsburgh. And I got bumped by a car. I got hit by a car. What did I do? I apologized. Oh, so sorry.
Things down.
And then I realized, oh, that's because I'm Canadian. I've got to stop
Over
that.
polite.
Loonies and toonies.
Over polite.
Raise your hand if you know what a loony is.
No.
Well, when I was no shame here. You're in a safe space. She's like, I know what it is. It's a $1 coin.
Every right to cross.
It's got a loon on it.
And I got
Yep. Fun fact: I won the loony sound contest in 6th grade. Bragging rights right there, and I will continue till the
And
end
then
of
I
my
realized,
days.
oh, that's because
It is I'm the governor general now. Our love of royalty.
Raise your hand.
Our politics are super boring, mostly uneventful.
She's like, I know.
Let me see.
It's a $1 coin. Every right to cross. It's got a
My
loon on
husband
it.
likes to say
Fun fact, I
What do
won
you
the
say about
Looney
Canada?
Sound contest.
that we're America's top hat,
Bragging rights right there, and I will continue till the end of my days.
and we're always we're always taking the holidays.
Our love of royalty.
Oh, he's gonna get on the soapbox.
They take all of our holidays and they make them up after, but they put them earlier on the calendar year.
My
Yeah.
husband.
4th of July.
Thanksgiving, their Independence Day.
4th of July here. Ours is July 1st. That's right. Thanksgiving is in November here. Ours is in October.
Boxing Day is
Yep.
after.
Boxing Day is after, but that doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. Everybody's going to the stores anyway. What
They
else?
take all of our holidays and
Well, January 1st, we kind of got to stick on that one. Christmas, we got to stick on that one. But yeah, we're taking all the holidays. Yep.
4th of July.
their Independence Day.
Calgary Stampede. Now that's something I need to learn about. My knowledge of anything west of Ontario is thin as veneer. So go ahead and test it. Yeah, you'll see. You'll see.
That doesn't really matter.
So just some general information about Canada.
What else?
The population, as of a couple of years ago, the entire huge country is a little bit over 38 million people. So I think that's like all of the people in Indiana possibly, you know, it's just really, really small. Out of that 38.25 million, about 90% of the population lives within 100 kilometers from the border. That's about 50 miles. the population, and people feel like they get criticized, and they say, well, wouldn't you want to stay as south as possible? Wouldn't you want to stay as close to the border as possible so you can get all your supplies and whatnot? So I think that's like all of the. We have a metric system. It is far superior, unless we are talking about kilograms, because nobody knows how to convert those. About 90% of the population. Cheap education. 100 kilometers from the border. That's about 50 Our university, I went to McGill. I joke with my friends, it's like the Harvard of Canada, and I left there after 4 years with 18 grand. You want to stay as close to the border as possible so you can get all of your supplies. All right, so we'll get to the rest later. We have a metric system. It is far superior, unless we are talking about kilograms. Okay, so when I first moved to Canada, I was 16 years old, and nobody knew. Students, teachers, principal, nobody knew about Canada. They would ask the most ridiculous, dumb, cockamamie questions you ever heard in your whole life. For example, and this was sincere, they were genuine. Did you live in an igloo? Okay. So do you guys have? I first moved to Canada. I was 16 years old. Do you live in shanties? And no. Like, what's a shanty? Students. All these questions, and I lived in Pittsburgh for 10 years before moving back to Pittsburgh or Montreal. And 10 years, it never failed. Like at least once a year, I'm getting the most ridiculous questions. So after a while, I learned to lean in. And what did that look like? Well. You know what, we did live in an igloo until I was about 14, and then we got baptized. But the reason why we live in igloos is because, well, this is how we're born. And 10 years. Mom crawls under the ice from the shanty. Dad still has to ice fish. We need to make a living. And out comes Freddie, ready to go. What did that look like? Wow. I would also say things like, well, you know, it's really cold. And I was dead serious, and they were dead believing me. But the reason why it's really cold up there. And you know, it's been cold for a long time. So most women, females, have evolved to grow beards. Mom crawls under the ice from the shanty. Dad still has to ice fish. We make a living. And they're like, what? And out comes Freddie. You want to see a red fiery beard? Come on. So I told Dwayne you can't stay any longer than 1 hour after because I'll start to get a 8 o'clock shadow. It's really cold up there. And you know, it's been cold for a long time. All right, well, here I'm going to ask my husband to tell us about the legend of Mulch Day Michael. Has anyone ever heard of that? Legend of Mulch Day Michael. Yeah. And they're like, what? And we have a little video here, and we don't need to unmute yet, but maybe this would be a good test, guys. I've got my mute on my laptop, and it's like 10 seconds, so when we're ready, let's just test it, but we're not ready yet. So come on up, sucker.
Yeah, sure. So Mulch Day Michael is a kindly man who comes when you're gardening in the spring as the hail is raining down upon you. And
we have a little video here, and we don't need to unmute yet, but maybe this would be a good test, guys. I've got my mute on my laptop, and it's like 10 seconds, so when we're ready, let's just test it.
The number varies based on time of year and how the population is doing. The good boys and girls who help their parents. The good boys and girls who help their parents to set out the mulch in the garden will receive a treat, a toy, for helping to make the garden beautiful. Because in Canada, their winter isn't that much worse, depending. I mean, if you're huddled up to the border like most of them are, for warmth, but it's extra. It's extra on both sides. And so when spring sort of does finally rear its head, having pretty gardens and flowers and things like that is nice after the desolate, inhospitable winter that you've just experienced.
Thank you very much for sharing the legend of Mulch Day Michael. Thank you so much. Let's give him a hand. Let's give him a hand. And this is Ellie's reaction when I ask her how it's going with Mulch Day Michael.
But it's extra. It's extra on both sides. And so when spring sort of does finally rear its head, having pretty gardens and flowers and things like that is nice after the desolate, inhospitable winter. winter that you've just experienced.
Thank you very much for sharing the legend of Mulch Day Michael. Thank you so much. Let's give him a hand. Let's give him a hand.
And this is Ellie's reaction when I ask her how it's going with Mulch Day.
How are you feeling about Mulch Day? Bad? Oh.
That's how she felt about Mulch Day. Yeah, wasn't good. Thank you very much for sharing that. Awesome. All right, I'm following out the script here that I have. Okay. So I'm going to share a few things about me. I'm a celebrity in Canada. I am quite popular, actually. Don't know if you knew that. Quite popular. Yes, yes, I am. All right, so I am from two places in Nova Scotia. This gentleman in the audience, I mean, he asked me where I was from, and not in a blue moon did I think that he would actually guess Bedeque. Okay, so we're all the way down off the map, 25 hours to here, driving, and another 4.5 hours to here. Bedeque is the start and the finish of the Cabot Trail. For anyone who doesn't know what the Cabot Trail is, it's an amazing tourist attraction. It's like you've been transported to Scotland. It's beautiful, and it goes all the way around Cape Breton Island. Now, the Alexander Graham Bell Museum is here. Alexander Graham Bell loved this area so much, he built a house across from where we used to live on the other side of the bay, and he lived out the rest of his days there. It is absolutely spectacular. How many people did we say? 769 people live in Bedeque. It's a village. And every time I pass and I see that it's a village, I go, yeah, that's good. Very touristic, though. So all of my mom's side of the family, they all still live there. There's a huge Gaelic, Celtic population there, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of that in a moment. When I was 7, moved down to near Halifax, which is the province of Nova Scotia. It's also an international airport and a big hub for military, both Canadian and American. But you'll mostly only see American there because I'm pretty sure the Canadian military exists of one tank, and some RCMPs. This is Cape Breton Island. I mean, need I say more? I get goosebumps still. So if you ever fly over Nova Scotia, you will see pretty much the same thing across the board, with a few exceptions. You're going to see a lot of trees, beautiful, beautiful trees. You're going to see a lot of lakes around every corner. There are a ton of lakes there, crystal blue. And you'll see the ocean. You're not going to see a lot of people. So if you don't like people, sorry you're here right now, but also there's this place that's amazing. I grew up pretty much on the ocean my whole life until moving to the US. How do you think I felt about moving to Pittsburgh? Landlocked. Yeah, there's 2 rivers that become one, but yeah, I wasn't real pleased with that.
3?
So, how
3
many?
rivers.
Well, 2, and then doesn't it turn into 1? At the point, into 1? Oh, maybe that's just where I'm thinking of downtown. Fact check. So the reason I mention that is because I grew up not only on the ocean, but I grew up in the woods, which is not very common here, I'm noticing. On the coastlines, whether it's all the way around or on the West Coast, most of that is beach. It's been made to be touristic, which is fantastic. I didn't really like swimming in eelgrass, for example, but we were like solidly alone. So the ocean was kind of like my best friend. And so was nomading and going out and just having time on my own in the forest. That's the prime of my childhood right there. So before I go on to the more southern part of Nova Scotia, I was going to ask my husband if he could just give us a little bit of history on Louisbourg. Anybody ever heard of Louisbourg? It was a fortress, French fortress. Did you ever go, Aaron? It's kind of far in Cape Breton. But the people still dress as they did back then. So Mrs. Toohey, I would highly encourage that you go. You make such wonderful costumes for Indiana Ballet Theater. And their costumes are no exception there. They're probably getting a little smelly, I'd imagine. But I was going to ask Peter to come up. My husband is a history teacher. And although he's not going to give you the whole rendition on Louisburg, I thought maybe 30 seconds or a minute.
Yeah, so Nat asked me to do this. Today was my last day of teaching middle school social studies for the year, so this is exactly what I want to be doing right now. No, but so the short version of it is Louisburg is at the tippy top of Cape Breton. It's a little fortress that the French had, and the French and the British, if you've ever looked at history for a little bit, it's about 1,000 years of them loving just fighting each other every single year. So this war that we here in the United States call the French and Indian War was called the 7 Years' War, even though it was 9 years long. Don't ask me about the names. So basically the French and the British fighting each other, and the British decide, let's take Louisburg, because they want to really strike a good blow against the French, and maybe, just maybe, they can then go and take Quebec, which at that time, still French. So they go to Louisburg, they try to get it. They're like, this isn't going well. They've got all their boats like going up to the fortress. They're getting shot at, and they're like, okay, forget it. But then like a couple of dudes are like, okay, well, actually we see like a little inlet where we can get past this and go. And then they all go, oh, let's follow those guys. And then, so they follow them. They're able to take Louisburg. And after that, basically, they've got a good station to go after the French, and they stage another attack for the next year. They go after Quebec. The British win. Their general dies, so that's, it's cut your losses. It is what it is. But all that to say, that was basically the end of the French in Canada, but it's why there is, still a large French-speaking population in Canada.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter Krivas, history teacher. Thank you so much. Ellie, would you like to add to that? You're good? Okay, come back to you later. This is Peggy's Cove. This was 20 minutes from my house. I was told when I announced that I was going to be doing this presentation, an old friend who I think I had a crush on in 7th grade, haven't heard from the guy ever since, okay, gets on Facebook and he says, make sure you tell them about the Black Rocks. Because every year, people step down onto the Black Rocks and they slip into the ocean and have a great time. Okay? So I brought up Peggy's Cove because it is a tourist attraction, but it is absolutely incredibly beautiful. I like to take a boat from Halifax, make my way down the coast to Peggy's Cove. It's about an hour. Have a lobster lunch and call myself fortunate. Sound like a good day, right? All right. So this is me with my family. And I put a measurement here because my cousin Jay looks really tall compared to all of us. He's only 3 feet. Nova Scotians are often known to be short. That's why you'll see me in heels, okay? Compared to my husband's family, I'm pretty much a hobbit, so I felt that this was appropriate. But Nova Scotians are personality-wise kind of like hobbits too. I hope my family is not live streaming. But we are a kind and friendly people. You go back in the history books, way, way back, hundreds of years. We are not carrying stakes and pitchforks. We are offering flowers and fruits. Very kind people. Of course, there are always exceptions in every society, but generally, we've got a pretty good rep. This is my grandfather, Grampy, very close to him. Me and my sister. And then look at this chucklehead over here. My brother Paul, my sister Stephanie, my brother Bobby, who's now 40 years old. Sometimes we like to steal him and have him come stay with us for a little while. And my parents, My mom is originally from Nova Scotia. Her, Tom Davis. My mother's maiden name is Davis. So in Bedeck, my grandfather, Richard, he was a curator at the Alexander Graham Bell Museum, Richard Davis. And my dad, when he was going to school with 4 kids at home, taking night classes and working full time, he would drive an hour to Sydney in rocky, cliffy areas to go to school to become an engineer. And he was building kites at the Alexander Graham Bell Museum.
Which one of those redheads is you?
Oh, this one. Can't you tell? All right, so I cheated. Okay, so I have red hair, I have an accent. It's mostly been shamed from my accent. I pretty much lost most of it because I don't think you'd even understand me if I came straight down from Nova Scotia today. But given that I'm Canadian, foreign, immigrant, redhead, I got kind of teased when I got here. And I was often compared to these random people, okay, but historical figures, okay? So I'm gonna play trivia, and I want you to guess who the real me is. So this one is kind of easy. We've got, so Ellie goes, oh, that's you, right? 10 years old, sarcasm has begun. Anne of Green Gables. I mean, is this not uncanny? That's amazing. All right, so I may not be a total celebrity, maybe just minor in Canada, but I do want to share some of my history with you all. Let's just go. So I told you when I was 16, we moved from Nova Scotia to Pittsburgh, resentfully. I was 16. How do you think that worked out for me or my parents? I'd like to say I think it was kind of cute. Then when I was 26, I moved back to Canada. I moved to Montreal. My dad's whole side of the family is from there. Nom de famille is Dion, like Dionne Warwick. And from there, I was an adult. I was 26 years old. I had my whole life ahead of me. I had not attended college. And when I got to Montreal, put myself together, I started doing painting. I joined McGill Choral Society. I went to university. I did great. 3.72 GPA, my old students in the back. It will be important to you someday. This is the day that I graduated. This is probably one of the proudest moments of my life other than my family events. Very proud of myself. I joined a band and I did one performance and said, no thanks, I'm going back to choir. Classical was for me. And then I met my husband, who is American. Go figure. I left the States and said, I'm never going back. I had a chip on my shoulder. I'm never going back. And then I meet an American. He's pretty cool though, right?
What's he doing there?
He's the wrong, yeah, exactly. He came up to live in Montreal for 4 years. I said, I'm not going back yet. You gotta come up here. And he did. There's my brother Bobby. Hockey, obviously. I had to do that because if not, like, they'll kick you out. I had to show a picture. All right, so dig a little deeper. Anyone ever heard of the Dion quintuplets? Yes, yes. They are my father's third cousins, Dion. So for those who are not familiar with the Dion quintuplets, they're the first quintuplets to be born naturally in recorded history. And all of them survived. Yeah. They were born to Oliva and Elzir Dion. And it's kind of a sad history. I'm gonna share it. It's gonna get a little dark, okay? So they're born, and the parents are overjoyed. They could not grow additional arms, so they were really in need of help. They got some help, but they were such a sensation, and this is right around the time of the Great Depression. It's like the country needed something, you know, like a hero. And they kind of became Canadian heroes. They were brought all across the country, very, very publicized. The Canadian government decided, well, this is a great moneymaker. Well, and those parents, they aren't really that great. So they declared the parents unfit to take care of their children, and the children became wards of the state in the equivalent of Canada. So they did not have best life ever. They had a pretty rough life. 2 are still alive to this day. I highly encourage that you read up. There are some documentaries about the Dion quintuplet story. Very, very critical, I think, just in learning about history so it doesn't repeat itself. Yes. My father thought that it would be a great idea to play a little trick on us when we were children. For example, he convinced us that Smurfs were real and lived up in our attic. This one, though, I came to school and declared to everyone that Celine Dion was my cousin. She is not. There's no relation. Not even spelled right. Finally, I have 2 third cousins, my father's second cousins, Marcel and Gilbert Dion. For anyone who is a hockey fan, raise all your hands. Raise your hands. Okay, good, good. Marcel Dion is Hall of Famer. He is a legend in hockey. I'd like to think that Ellie got some of his talent. She plays hockey here in Valpo. I didn't even pressure her to do it. She enjoys it, don't you? She does hockey a couple days a week, and then she does ballet with Mrs. Toohey a couple times a week. And both the coach and the teacher say it's good cross-training, right? I don't know if these guys would have been down to do ballet, but I'm sure they did something equivalent. So speaking of hockey players, I've got a little trivia. You ready? You ready? You ready? Okay, I got a little trivia. Who's this guy?
Wayne Gretzky.
Whoa! Fastest response ever. You get a Canadian treat. Woohoo! I'm sure she likes you. The crispy crunch is still good. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Bonus points, what team?
The Racers. Then the Oilers. Then the LA Kings.
Wow.
Excuse me,
What? Who else?
you missed a team?
Because they're not one of the original 6.
You missed a team, nor is Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's true. And his brother, or I'm sorry, I was going back to Marcel, but these are all legends in history. So sometimes I'm kind of taking a chance that you may or you may not know. I was saying to this gentleman in the front when he named Bedeck out of nowhere that I was from, which is very, very rare to hear that, that when I first moved here to Valparaiso and I went to open a checking account, the teller said, "Oh, I know someone from Canada." And I think my soul died that day. Yeah, Canada. Yeah, Ellie. All right. So I want to delve into history a little bit more. Poutine. It's in your future. Donair. In your future. This is Don Cherry, the most ridiculous person on TV of all time. He's very excitable. And my cousin, who is in a music group called Coig. So we're going to learn about that. I'm going to kind of transition the mode a little bit. I do want to touch on 3 important moments in history, plus a 4th, a bonus. So I want to talk about really the areas that I learned in depth. My background is education, and when I moved to Quebec and to Montreal, I became assimilated, okay? I was in love with Quebec. I learned the language. I went and got lessons 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 months so that I could learn. I was learning beside immigrants, even though I was Canadian. I wanted to learn the language. I lived with a Quebecois family. I had a Quebecois boyfriend. I was really into the culture. And likewise, when I went to McGill, fantastic education, by the way, I learned how to become a teacher of English as a second language. And within that, the faculty that I had, the teachers that I had, became my mentors, and they were so gifted at teaching us all of the history and making sure that we understood why English is important and also why sometimes it's so detested, right? Why it's so feared. And so that particular part helped me to learn history, and I want to share that with you. Again, Canada, Quebec, Nova Scotia, all full of history. I'm going to share a few events with you. It's going to get real dark, folks. First, trivia. Which of these 4 celebrities are not Canadian?
Keanu Reeves is not.
Okay, let's do a vote. How about this guy, Ryan Reynolds, who says Ryan Reynolds is not Canadian? Seth Rogen? Dan Levy? Keanu Reeves?
Not.
Going with that? It's your final choice. Okay. False. They're all Canadian.
Oh.
I didn't know Keanu Reeves was Canadian until seriously yesterday. No idea. That's just, now I like him even more. Okay. So I want to talk about my cousin Rachel. She is a fiddler in a group called Coig, C-O-I-G. They play mostly Celtic music. When you were walking in, this is the music that you were hearing. They did a rendition of Salisbury Hill. And they are super freaking talented. Super talented. My cousin Rachel is several years younger than me, so I didn't have that like sister-like relationship like I did with my other cousins. But this is a family, again, from Nova Scotia, so is it likely that she's amazing? Yeah, she is. So I reached out to her in preparation for this and asked her if she could send you all a hello. And she took it so seriously that she was sending me recordings of Valparaiso to make sure she said it right. Okay, you wanna hear it? So we'll have to unmute. Do I have to unmute mine too? Okay.
Hello, Valparaiso. Rachel Davis here. I hope you're being good to my lovely cousin, and I hope you'll all come and visit us here on the east coast of Canada and experience some of our amazing culture and music. But here's something to keep you going in the meantime.
So good. If we have time, I'm going to put that music on at the end. It is so good. All right. Well, I'm not done with showing off. My family, part of my family, my cousins who I was very close with, sister level close with, now live in Newfoundland. Newfoundland, for some of you. Newfie, for others. My Uncle Ken lives in Nova Scotia now, but he is so attached to his roots in Newfoundland that he would call us mainlanders, because you know it's off the coast. I mean, so are we kind of, right? Cape Breton Island, but he'd call us mainlanders. So I reached out to my Aunt Linda, his wife, and I asked, hey, could we get just a few words from Uncle Ken? He's kind of like a celebrity to me. I love him to death. He's hilarious. He's worked so hard his whole life, and he's just going to say hi. Good?
How's she going, boys? I'm Ken Flynn from Fox Harbour, Placentia Bay, Newfoundland, Canada. I got 9 brothers, 1 sister. Okay, my father was a self-employed contractor, same as myself. My mom was a stay-home mom. She looked after us. We likes to work hard and play hard. Come and visit any time and have a drink.
Who couldn't understand? I know, Peter, the first time you met Uncle Ken, you were really suffering.
I had to adapt.
He had to adapt.
Adapt to the accent.
That's the Newfoundland accent. Can't bring them here, but I could bring you the accent. No, but my village is actually very similar to that. This is St. John's, Newfoundland. And you see how it says, hey, boys, that's how I used to talk. Not quite as much as this guy who's showing off, obviously, but yeah. Kind of like Maine, people from Maine, wouldn't you agree? All right. So, us Canadians like to think that our country is not full of dark history. Well, it is. I'm going to share 3 parts with you. One is the Acadian to Cajun history. The other is the cultural genocide of the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And then all about the Quiet Revolution. So we're going to go a little bit, okay? And then you're going to learn about my hero, Terry Fox. Okay, here's what I want you to think about while I'm telling you this. There's a thread. So I want you to put yourself in the mindset that New France has been taken over by New England. The Acadians are living on the East Coast. And then a little bit further in history, not that much further, the Indigenous peoples then have some interaction with European settlers. And then fast forward quite a long ways after, still related to these historical ties, is the evolution of the entire society in Quebec. All right, anybody heard of Acadians? Raise your hand if you've heard of Canadians, or Acadians, thank you. Raise your hand if you've heard of Cajuns. Cajun, okay, okay. Acadian, Acadian, Cajun, a Cajun. In the late 1600s to the early 1700s, New England took control of New France. Acadians, who were French settlers on the east coast of Canada, refused to sign an oath of allegiance to the British king. So it's not going to bode well for them. Between the 30 years of 1755 and 1785, about half of Acadian people were either slaughtered or they died of starvation or other related violence. Thousands of Acadians during that time fled to what was then Spanish Louisiana. And thanks to King Carlos III, thousands were saved as he sponsored ships to pick them up and bring them back. So of course, Louisiana, there's a lot of history there, current all the way back, lots of trauma. And over that time, it is clear without a doubt that the Acadians and Cajuns are an incredible example of cultural resistance. Okay, I am giving you a lot, but guess what? I made it short, okay? And I really want you to learn some history, okay? It's just a few blips. One very important aspect of Canada are the Aboriginals. Autochtones in French, also Indigenous peoples. So sometimes we intermingle those words. Really comprised of 3 major groups and about 2 million people. So if you do the math, that's still a significant population of the 5 people that live in Canada. The First Nations is kind of like an all-encompassing identity for about 630 communities, 50 distinct nations, and about 50 Indigenous languages. Again, distinct, very different from each other. Some similarities, but there are clear differences. When I told you I was born in Bedeque in Nova Scotia, I was born right next to a Micmac reserve in Waikagama. So there's a lot of Micmac in Nova Scotia, great stories out of that, beautiful art, music, and so on. And then I name a few more that I'm familiar with, but again, there's a huge, huge diverse population of First Nations peoples. So we have Algonquin and Cree in Quebec. We have Inuit. Where do they live? Point with your finger. Right. Go up north. A lot of Inuit and Métis live in Quebec. None of it Northwest Territories, Labrador, Yukon. Métis actually means mixed. The Métis peoples are a mix between French and Cree. And about 1/3 of Indigenous peoples it identifies as Métis. So I want to share a little bit of history about the cultural genocide that happened. I don't know how familiar you are all with this, but it's still emerging. It's still an investigation. There are thousands of mass graves that are being found on the regular, okay? So 139 residential schools ran for most of the 20th century. Residential schools were part of Canada's history, but like it's a bad word. They were not good, even once. There were more residential schools than the 139, but those were privately operated without financial assistance from the government. They were even worse. Impacted by European settlers, Indigenous people died from disease and displacement. So we're thinking about the Acadians, got a little parallel going. There were treaties that were made, not honored, or possibly broken. The 1876 Indian Act imposed strict control over the lives of Indigenous peoples. So the government passed legislation that said we are in control, and meet our friend, the Catholic Church. We're in partnership. And what that did is enabled them to open up institutions where families were displaced and children were forcibly removed from their homes and put into these schools, okay? They had to adopt the language. They could not speak their language. Their hair was cut. All of their identity was taken from them. Language, culture, religion, everything. All 139 residential schools were run by the Catholic Church and supported financially by the federal government. Other schools ran independently. So about 1,300 unmarked graves, mostly children as of 2021. And you'll see in the presentation, I'm adding my sources because I want to be clear about where I'm getting that information, okay? So pretty dark. And in the early 2000s, the government, I think it was 2005, no, in 2008, the government created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It started out by sitting with First Nations peoples, with Indigenous peoples, and just listening. What happened, right? What happened in your life? What is your story? They gathered a lot of data. If you know or not, Indigenous peoples often pass their history and their stories orally, so they speak. And so this was a very important part of the investigation process and also hopefully a part of the recovery process. After gaining all of that data, there was an investigation that began, and it is still ongoing. So the source that I put here, it is super clear cut. You can see on the maps where Indigenous peoples were, how far the children were displaced, up to 600 kilometers away, like 300 miles away, so that their parents couldn't visit them, completely detached from their communities. And then there are also maps where it shows where some of those mass graves are currently. So basically, open up a school, a child dies, or on purpose or not, just put them in the grave. And that's what is currently being uncovered now. This is really important to my history because my understanding was not this growing up. Okay, I did not have this education. I lived next to a reserve, and there were Micmac who went to my school and who I was friends with to this day. But this was not part of our history. So Canada, as overplayed as we are, we still have it. Okay, they try to say they're better than you, and you just tell them, no, you've got a dark history too. Okay, let's hop over to Quebecois culture. How are we doing on time? We doing okay? Okay. When I moved to Montreal, I was blown away at the Quebecois culture, the music, the history, and how, have you ever known someone in your family that just knows all the stories, right? And you just want to hear everything that they have to say. It's like listening to the most amazing storyteller, the most amazing, closest relative that you have. That is my love for Quebecois culture. And I shared a few. I'm not going to click on them because I'm going to keep these people too long. A few of my favorites, but some of the key components that I love about Quebecois culture is, one is self-sufficiency. We are not going to rely on anyone but ourselves. That doesn't mean that they don't get funding from the federal government, but they are mostly self-sufficient. So how does that play out? Their musicians are actually pretty freaking good. They're amazing, right? You were listening to it today, Jean Leloup. They're journalists, comedians. Oh my gosh. It's like, you ever watch something in a different language? You're out visiting somewhere and you're like, I don't know what they're saying. This is so boring. But once you understand the language, wow, opened up a whole new world in my brain. A whole new world. The other thing about this self-sufficiency is that they do a lot of farm to table. So I used to buy my fruit and vegetables and my produce at a grocery store, and I tried to make an effort to be healthy, and I bought my fruits and vegetables and produce organic. Okay. Well, I remember one day I picked up an apple, and my partner at the time said, why are you getting that? I mean, this one's like from the guy down the road. And I said, well, it's organic. And he said, yeah, but where's it from? Oh, Australia. The unnecessary act of purchasing something just because it had the organic label was one thing. But it was the reminder that everything I needed was right here. And if I needed something else, maybe I want to make that an exception. And I kind of changed my values around that. And thank goodness I did. I ended up becoming part of a panier biologique, which is like organic baskets. I know like Crème de la Crop does that. There are a couple around here where you pay a certain amount and you get a basket full of produce during the summers. So I did that, and guess what I found out? In Montreal and in Quebec City, some of the high-rise buildings, they carve out space for greenhouses so you can get all this stuff during the winter, which, let's be honest, Montreal, I think last year summer was on a Wednesday. Okay, there is such little opportunity to grow all year round. So that's that self-sufficiency that goes from culture to music to arts to commerce, the economy, everything you're consuming. Very, very self-sufficient. I respect that. I respect that. The only thing that I wasn't super impressed with is how the fear of English has played in Quebecois culture today. So I say Quebecois and not French Canadian, and I'll get to that. There's a big difference between the two. And there is a real concern over language that sometimes supersedes reason. Okay, so I'm going to get to that. It's understandable, and there's reasons behind that, but that part was a little bit tough to swallow. Okay, so I want to talk to you about the Quiet Revolution. La Révolution tranquille. Francophone, 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 la Révolution tranquille. This is like the calm, the tranquil revolution. There were not pitchforks and major violence. It was a lot of societal, cultural, economic, education change happening within about the span of a decade. So all this stuff was happening, and people were kind of revolting, but I think it's kind of funny because this happened in Canada. We couldn't even get the revolution right, seriously? So right around the 1960s, now this is where I get really interested because this is education. And education is that really interesting system that if you tweak it just a little bit, you're going to see major societal impacts. And this is a perfect example. So in the 1960s, there were lots of things that were kind of stewing. This is post-war, industrialism, and Lesage, Québécois leader, says, I have a great idea. We've got all this water. We have got loads of water. We're going to turn it into electricity. And this led to a nationwide consumption of a renewable energy. What do you think that did for the Quebec government? Cha-ching. It allowed them, it enabled them to put more resources into social services, health services, education services, and so on. Fantastic, right? They invested all this money, and a ton of people got jobs for the government. Okay, so government starting to get, I can't even say it was big. Now it's big, but it was pretty shaky back then. Okay. Well, right about that time, the Québécois, the French-speaking Canadians, they were not seeing this progress. They were not living this progress. They were being oppressed. They were being told by their church leaders, Catholic Church, to stay on the farm, have a lot of children. You don't really need to learn to read. We're going to read the Bible to you in Latin anyway. So, have lots of kids, come to church, and you don't really need an education. So, by early 1960s, half of students in Quebec were dropping out by age 15, and most did not finish past 6th grade. Okay, let that sink in. So you have all of this economic floodgates opening, okay, especially with hydroelectricity. Everyone's like, yeah, society's great, woo, we're doing great things. Whoa, that economy's awesome. Yeah, let's get that house and that car and all these things that we want. I've got a big paycheck now. I work for the government. Woo! And the French Québécois are like, why is everybody like living on the west side? Why are they all doing so much better than we are? They have like small businesses, they have big businesses, we've got bankers, lawyers, everybody else. We're just a bunch of idiots on the farm. That's how they were starting to feel. And they had every right to, because that inequitable gap was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was becoming more and more and more noticeable. So by the mid-1960s, the government was becoming more and more prosperous. They said, you know what? We're seeing there's some issues with our education. They centralized education. Okay, just to check you, in the US, it's decentralized. What you learn in New Jersey is going to be different than what you learn in Georgia. Each state is different. At this point in history, education became centralized and a lot of secondary schools were opened. Remember, why would you open up a secondary school in Quebec City if most children are just going back on the farm? Well, they started to open them up nationwide and standardize education. When the Québécois, French-speaking Canadians on the Catholic side, when they started to notice things, they said, well, wait a second. Well, what's so not so great about us? Why are all these other people prospering so much? And they started to realize, oh, it's the Protestants. But Protestants, asterisk. Anyone who was not Catholic, anyone who was not French-speaking, Protestant. You could be Jewish, Muslim, Lutheran, any Christian, anything. You could be English and Catholic. You're going to be on that Protestant side. That's how people identified themselves. So what mentality that bred was, West is the best, we're the lowlifes in the East. And the cities actually grew economically, big buildings in the West. Like you can see it. You can see it now. So the language was a huge barrier, huge. And when the Quebecois, French-speaking people became aware of this, they said, that's it, we're sick of this. They left the church. And by leaving the church, they gained their own identity. So remember when I was talking about New France getting taken over by New England and all that jazz? When that happened, the French-speaking Quebecois had to identify now, not as Français de France, they had to identify as Canadian. And then over time, they started to find themselves, well, French-Canadian. But when this quiet revolution started, it was an enormous cultural shift for the French Quebecois people. They said, we're taking our language back, we're taking back our identity, we are the Quebecois. Do you get it now? Make sense? Thumbs up like I do to my students. Okay, we're all still awake. Moment, I saw you drifting off there. That's okay, you work hard. It's okay, it's okay.
Hi, friends in Valparaiso. My name is...
Yeah, okay. So, to lighten the mood, I asked my friend, Dr. Liz Foley, who I'm friends with in choir. It's been probably almost 20 years. I asked her to give us a little fun fact. It's so ridiculous. Are you ready?
Hi, friends in Valparaiso. My name's Liz. I'm a friend of Natalie's from when she lived in Montreal, and we met at McGill Choral Society. So fun fact about Montreal, there's a neighborhood here named Lachine, which is French for China, or the China. And most people here think it's because some explorer back in the day was so dumb that when they crossed the canal, they actually thought they had made it all the way to China. But it's not actually true. In actual fact, it's a nickname making fun of the guy who owned the land because he was supposed to be getting to China and he was such a bad explorer that La Chine became his nickname. So to this day, there's a neighborhood named after making tea.
That's really embarrassing. Hey, La Chine. Do not call me that now. All right, I've got another trivia. Ellie, are you ready? She's reading her. Isn't it great that she's not on a screen? Just saying. Ready? You got them? You still awake? I'm surprised you didn't open up one of those bad boys. All right. Who is this star? Oh, Mrs. Oistich, you can go give her a chocolate bar. Let her choose which one. Don't pick the coffee crisps here for yourself. There, Ellie. Alanis Morissette, I dare say. I was a bit bitter in the 90s. I grew up, I was a teenager in the 90s, and I was like, no, you're a dork back in Canada. She was a super dork. Look at that. I'm going to put my hair all around. She was very popular in Canada, but as a rock star, like a pop star, super cheese. So by the time she got to the 90s, it took me a while to warm up to her, but let's admit it, she's talented all the same. Congratulations. Who's this guy? Okay, this man in the front. Bonus, what movie? Miss Dana got it. You got to go give her a treat.
Cool Runnings.
Cool Runnings was good, but it's Uncle Buck. You remember that moment?
He was great.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I'd like to say we were related, but we weren't. All right, so I'm going to finish up with my favorite story, which is of Terry Fox. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Terry Fox. You have? You have? You have? Oh, that warms my heart because most people have not. Have you heard of Terry Fox? Yeah. Terry Fox is a great story, and in my first years of teaching, I would always tell the story of Terry Fox. So Terry Fox was known as an athlete. I mean, talk about that hair. Isn't it great? Yeah, it's pretty nice. Sorry. He was good looking, very, very charismatic, great personality. He was an incredible athlete. So when he was 19 years old and he was doing track and he was getting soreness in his leg, he thought it was just, maybe he injured himself. But it became clear pretty quickly that there was something desperately wrong. And it was discovered that he had osteosarcoma in his right leg, deadly. So he started treatment right away, and part of that treatment was amputation. Now, if you're over the age of, 20, you may have an idea of what prosthetics would have looked like back in the 80s, and actually back in the 70s. It's pretty rough. So Terry, who was always a happy-go-lucky guy, very enthusiastic, loved life, deep depression. And it wasn't until he went to visit a camp that sort of turned around. And by sort of, I mean dramatically. He went to visit a camp with kids who had cancer. And I make a connection between him and Roosevelt, when he got polio and he went to see kids who were at camp, and it just kind of reminded him at how fortunate he has been to have lived the life he did. And these poor children are going about their days, they're just trying to live the best life they can. And Terry Fox had a similar reaction, a similar experience. So instead of continuing in depression and all of this, his life made a turn, and he decided, I'm going to do something positive about this. He planned for 6 months to a year, I'm not quite sure if it was 6 months to a year, but he planned for a significant amount of time to run a marathon of hope, to raise funds for cancer research. This is one of Canada's very first fundraisers. Think like the Dimes. March of Dimes, yeah. And he had this dream that if he could run across Canada with his prosthetic, if he could go from place to place all across Canada, that maybe he could just convince $1. $1? I mean, in Canada we're like, how few from United States. So a dime, we wouldn't have gotten far. But he did ask for $1, just $1 from everyone. And his family, his dad and his brother, got a van and they mapped out the whole country. He started in the East Coast. He went through Bedeck. He went through that whole area. And okay, this is Indiana. I did the Indy half. That was easier than pie. No, it was really hard for me, but I can't even imagine how hard it would have been for Terry. Guess how much he was running every day? The equivalent of a marathon every single day. Now I'm going to get dark for a second. Think about that prosthetic, what that was doing to his leg. To his hips, to his whole body. So when I was reading, because I wanted to teach my students about this amazing story, tragic and amazing, I wanted to share with them some of those struggles. So I shared some quotes. He had a journal. At the end of every day, he would write in his journal. He would run through sleet, rain, hot weather. He would run on hard pavement, hill after hill after hill after hill, around places just on the Trans-Canadian Highway, which was built for beauty, not for efficiency. It wasn't until he got to about Thunder Bay. So when he got to Thunder Bay, he started to have pain again, but like a different kind of pain. He started to get like flu-like symptoms and so on. And sadly, the cancer had returned. I mean, is it a big shock given what he was doing? It's absolutely amazing, but it's hard to think about. A marathon every day. So he was transported back to his home, and he received treatment, but sadly he died. His cause, since 1981, has raised over $850 million. It is a true example of fundraising from the heart, but it was more the following. As he was going on these isolated runs, he had a van with him, but he was alone. He talks about the hours and days of isolation. No phone, no music unless they were projecting it from the van. But when he would go from town to town or village to village, people would follow. And they had signs. And they would sometimes run with him for miles. And they would give him donations. He was on TV. He was gaining a lot of traction. And that's what kept his energy going. This guy is an inspiration to me. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, I think we're down. So, wrapping up, Canada is reality. We may be over polite, but we can have our days. I mean, I've got red hair. It's going to come out sometimes. We have a sort of functional healthcare system. It's free, sort of, vision and dental or not. You'll wait many hours to see a doctor, but when times get tough, my husband and I went through some tragic stuff, they were there. Some foods are just plain better, except for Oreos. Don't get a Canadian Oreo. They suck. Ice cream, chocolate, top notch in Canada. And there's a variety of treats that you can get, including all dressed potato chips, which I highly recommend. Education is cheap. Our money looks like Monopoly money. Yeah. The pluralistic society compared to American assimilistic society tends to result in more welcoming environment for immigrants and diverse cultures. And education may not be the best, but it's still pretty darn cheap and it's centralized. So what you learn in Nova Scotia, you'll likely learn on the West Coast. And there are some good pros to that, in my opinion. Okay, so I want to finish with our Canadian anthem. It's not the one you thought.
More than one?
Oh, there's more than one. So at this point, I'm going to let that play. I want to check on the food and everything, and then we'll just turn it down and I'll put my cousin's music on and we're going to go, I guess, Q&A or eat or both, some level of those two. So I'll leave you with the anthem. Are we ready? No. I'll go 38. I'll fast forward. We good on the screen? Yep. See how it's doing. Let's see if it goes. It is, but then the see that? Yep. Well, I have to you have to watch it.
Anthem, and we now know why they don't play that at hockey games. It's a shortened version. But, thank you very much, Natalie. We're going to be eating something and drinking something very soon. We're going to have time for question and answers in just a moment. And as most of the folks here know, when we finish, we're going to move some chairs over, set some tables up here, and you're going to eat and socialize afterwards. So I wanted to, let's see, under the trivia questions, since you had several of those, what was the first band from Canada ever to play on MTV?
Rush? No.
Good suggestion. I actually, in a Freudian slip, named them thinking we were drinking the name of the band, April Wine, who is from Nova Scotia.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Did you know that?
I did not.
There you go.
I want a chocolate bar.
Right. So, and then let's see, with Uncle Ken, Liz, and Rachel, who I found out about today. As you know, I tried to call my friend Catherine in Nova Scotia, see if she could chime in live. but was not even given a choice. I had to leave a message, didn't talk to her. I blame that on...
Catherine Descaries.
There you
Right,
go,
yeah.
yes.
Shout out.
Shout out to Catherine, and who I introduced her to the United States by hitchhiking
Wow.
in Maine with her.
Wow.
So that was a welcoming
It's a
time.
great place to hitchhike,
And
I guess.
I know that Alexander Graham Bell now, Nova Scotia, that was the problem with the connection today when I called. So anyway, I'm just tying a few things together.
That's a good one, yeah.
I would like to say about the being nice. During my traveling days, I had a backpack, and every seemingly American that I met, very nice, and oh, you know, where are you from? This, and then soon to find out they're Canadian, and but what they did as time went on, no joke, they put their Canadian flag on their backpack. One, to let you know, I am not an American. I think that was the main thing.
Yeah,
Politically
sadly, like when you go to
speaking,
Europe, they say put a Canadian flag
they
on.
do, because you're deemed neutral.
Or just easy to condescend to upon. Oh.
I think a lot of it was that they would be safe in a lot of places because they were not Americans.
And we
That's what I
helped
found.
with the war and the Dutch, and there's a whole history there. So folks in Holland like us,
Right.
apparently.
Yeah, so, and then I want to also, shout out, Jake, if you're watching, I'm ready to buy a house in Calgary, okay? That's for you. And then...
I looked at what houses look like, okay? Don't get any ideas. I looked at what houses look like in Nova Scotia. So in that spot near Peggy's Cove, where I was telling you I lived 20 minutes from, is also only half an hour away from Halifax, 3 universities, international airport, and so on. For $279,000 Canadian, $5 American, you can get a 2-story on the ocean, 2-story on the ocean with 5 acres. Wow. What? All right, let's go.
Nice. All right, so if you have a question for our friend Natalie Krivas, you're going to raise your hand and I'm going to get the mic to you, okay? So.
You were saying that the educational system is centralized. I knew Canadians who lived out west in the prairie provinces, and they were forced to learn French, which they felt they had no use for. Is that still the situation in Canada?
No use for?
They were west. I knew a lot of Canadians who lived out west. And when they centralized the educational system, they were being forced to learn French, which many of them resented, didn't want to learn French, felt they had no use for it out in the, these ones were out in Alberta. Is that still the situation? Do all Canadians in school have to take French?
It is
All
the
Canadians.
second official language in Canada. So like everyone, you have to take languages in school. You're going to take French as the second language. Now, I haven't lived there for a long time, so that could have changed. What I will say, though, is that the French populations have grown so much, and they have their own communities in the West, in the rural communities, all over the place. So there is still a need, but when the Quebecois culture and all of that shift happened, there was a law that was made and passed called Bill 101, and that protects the French language, which the Quebecois need in their, in their own self-advocacy to protect their language. And so that Bill 101 requires a lot of language protection, meaning you could go to Nova Scotia and be in the most English rural town, but the government signs are going to be also in French. It's going to be a both and.
The ones out west, the kids were all having to take French.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, that was 20 years ago, whatever it was.
There's been a lot of controversy about it, though, for sure.
Is the independence movement still strong? You don't hear too much
About 50-50. So what he's talking about is the French Quebecois people, about 50% or maybe more of the population want to be independent. And there's a referendum that gets passed every now and then, and everybody gets all up in arms, and it usually ends up about 50-50, 49-51. Very, very close.
Would the country let them go?
Yes, that is a conversation without the mic.
I don't know. Just say, let 'em- what?
Yep.
If the Canadians are so nice, why do they love hockey so much? It's a combination.
That's how we get out our aggression, man. Don't take me to a hockey game if you don't want to hear potty mouth, because I get into it. It's like there's something that comes over me. The checking, like that's legit. My dad, who is almost 70, is still playing with folks a generation or two younger than him. He is skilled. My brother too, very, very skilled. And I would say a lot of that is ability to knock your opponent. So it's not as like, when you can't compare it to football, for example. It's not quite as bad, but your shoulders are gonna be jacked by the time you're done. But they have to get their aggression out somehow, eh?
It looks like football and boxing and other violent sports.
Less hitting of the helmets.
Yes.
But you ever see a hockey fight? Boy, is that entertaining. The shirt comes over, it's a whole thing, and the refs just kind of go, okay, we're cool. We're just gonna come over here and let them have their time. It's like soap opera for guys and girls.
Before they had helmets, they lost all their teeth.
Yeah, my dad got a puck in the eye before. It was not pretty. Yes, Tom?
Do you think 2024 is the soonest Americans can buy property in Canada?
Back off, eh?
Do you see that being extended?
Yeah.
Is there a lot of, I don't know if it's distrust of Americans or not liking the American money
Maybe not so much
coming in?
knowing. So remember when I said that our politics are very boring? So like we'll watch American politics, but media is media, right? So you're really only getting a filtered view unless you're really, really committed. You're getting a filtered view. You're getting a filtered view of media in Quebec too. There are lots of movies that happened over the 10 years I lived in Montreal that I never had access to because they were not translated into French. So even if I planned on watching it in English, it wouldn't be available if it wasn't also translated into French. So there is some filtering. And I'll tell you, I grew up in, Nova Scotia, Hobbits, whatever. It's pretty homogenous. There's a really strong Lebanese population there. That's why we'll have donaires. It's a Lebanese dish. But otherwise, not a ton of diversity. You're just talking about very few populated people. So when I would hear about, like, there was this kid that came to our school in junior high, and he was from Detroit. Ooh. He was like, yeah, I brought a knife to school every day. Everybody stayed away from him. Then he learned I was moving to the States. He's like, bring a knife to school with you every day. We had this like view that was very stereotypical. I thought all Americans talked like this.
South of 30, they do.
Even everyone from New York to LA. So, I'm just calling out my bias. I had no idea, but again, that's a two-way street, and I think like Facebook is huge for me. Huge. I get to, my family is probably watching right now, and I get to stay in touch with them. All those videos I got. Like, this is a village, a blip on this planet, and they are connected to the network. So for them, for us, like, that's access to information too. It's important. I don't know if that answers your question.
What are the main industries?
Natalie, I have 2 French-Canadian phone numbers for the Canadian Drug Center. Are we still allowed to get cheaper medications from Canada?
Yep. So raise your hand, would you please? That wonderful woman back there, if she wasn't honest, could be making a nice pretty buck today, because she has a phone number that she's held on to. I call it the golden nugget. She's got a phone number and information where you can get free medication. So if you're so inclined, you could come and see me, but I'm gonna charge you. You could go and see her and she'll be very happy. I mean, this is like, it looks like it's from 1980.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
You get it legally?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yes, I was reading a couple of days ago that Americans and a couple of other countries are not really welcomed in Canada because they consider us terrorists because of the amount of shootings that are happening in the U.S. I was reading an article about that.
Yeah, again, I mean, there's a lot of fear. Like my family, my cousin's husband suffers from cystic fibrosis, And he is so immunocompromised. He has had 2 lung surgeries, cancer removed from him. He's got all this stuff going on. He can't afford to get sick. He can't afford to get COVID. He's got foreign lungs, right? And so my aunt and uncle are even more scared to come down and visit because they're not really aware of what the laws are and all that. I went to Montreal last January and the curfew just ended. So it is very different. And I mean, I would just say, like, be open to that, because this is a big wide country with a lot of differing opinions going on. And Canadians are like, well, I don't know which opinion to believe, and I'm just going to listen to the news. But, you know, to each their own. Not everybody thinks like that.
So Natalie, I'm told that food may be getting cold, so we are going to dismiss
Sacrilege.
class. And I'm going to just wrap things up by 2 things. One is I wanted to introduce you and out on the recording to Victoria Perez, who is going to help us coordinate the World Cultural Festival. So she is here, so please welcome her to the Vic family. Thanks for agreeing to help us out.
Yeah, come on up.
Come on up. And,
Oh, you're getting called out now.
yes. So now you can see her pretty face. Come on up.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Victoria. And I also wanted to just mention that I was in Mexico this past week and came back early this morning and part
4 a.m. or something like that?
4:30 a.m., yes, arrived, and I was there visiting my oldest son, Landon, who has been living in Guadalajara. So he and his girlfriend, Jasmine, are going to be traveling up from Guadalajara soon and coming back home. So it was great to see you, Landon. I love you. And so with that, we are going to have some good food and drink. So thank you again, Natalie.
Please try just one thing or all of the things, but try a little bit. Just try.
Yep.
Oh boy, okay.
Sent to Canada, and by whom?
Why were tulips sent to Canada? Why are they sent?
It's an Ottawa question.
Oh, I don't know.
From the Netherlands, they send tulips every year to Canada because Princess Juliana stayed there during the war, and to thank, that's when the tulip festival takes place.
And now it's a tradition.
The other is a sad thing. You know what is Canada's biggest air tragedy?
Was it the Swiss Air flight?
Pardon?
Swiss Air flight? What?
Air tragedy.
Yeah, it went over. Actually, there was a little island by our house, and there was wreckage found there.
Near Island.
Mm-hmm.
My cousin was the captain of the plane.
Meenakshi, sorry. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Let's go eat.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank
Try
you, Natalie.
poutine. Thank you. I'll play the music, and then they can listen to it.
Tomorrow